Hi, this is Shovin May, and I'm from Purdue Extension, Posey County, and today we're going to be talking about food chains and food webs. So, I don't know how much you know about food chains and food webs, but the first place we have to start is, do you know the difference between them? Do you know where your food comes from? Do you know what else besides animals are involved in both food chains and food webs? I'm going to give you a minute or two to think about those or discuss if you're watching this video with someone. Okay, so by now you have thought about where your food comes from, and if you couldn't think of what else was involved in a food chain besides animals, you're probably not eating as many veggies as you should, but the other place food comes from is plants. So our food chains and food webs always start with plants. Where do plants get their energy to grow and survive? That is called photosynthesis. And there are a lot of really neat experiments you can do about photosynthesis. That'll be a topic for another time. But right now, we're just going to condense it into photosynthesis being the process by which plants get their energy. So a plant doesn't have a mouth, it doesn't eat, right? But it does gain energy from the sun and grow. And it grows into something that animals eat. So we'll start there, and I will tell you right now that the food chains that I am going to make are not going to involve any plants, mainly because I didn't have the supplies, but lots of plants are easy to draw. If you are going to make a food chain with me, you'll need a piece of paper and something to write with, and I'll let you gather those things. Pictures of animals would be very helpful. Unless you want to draw them, that's up to you. I'll let you gather at least a piece of paper and a pencil, and then we'll get right to it. I hope you've gathered your supplies by now, and I am going to let you in on a little secret. I actually have other supplies that I am using, but I don't expect a lot of people to have them, and I don't expect you to go out and buy them. I am just taking an easier route than gathering animal pictures because I happen to have, I'm going to get maybe the biggest one, I'll try this one, see if you can see it, a snake rubber stamp, and on the back is where I'll put the ink and stamp a picture of that snake for our food chain. But for now, we've talked about, we'll save him for last, we'll talk about the different roles animals play in our food chain, right? The first food chain I'm going to make is going to be with 3 animals, a mouse, a bird, and a cat. So, which of those do you think is predator and which is prey? Predator, of course, is the animal that eats the prey. And keeping in mind, the prey is usually the animal that eats either a smaller animal or some kind of plant. So, think about think about mouse, bird, and cat. And then we'll make our food chain with that. So, I have a mouse, and I'm going to put him on my rubber stamp pad and stamp mouse. And then I have a bird. If you were thinking, well, the bird eats the mouse, you were right. The bird would be next. And then I have, what eats a bird? A cat. My cats eat a lot of birds. So, cat is going to be the main predator in this chain. And you can see where I made a mouse and a bird and a cat. And I'll go ahead and put my arrows so I know who's eating who. And if you said that the cat is the predator of the bird and the bird is the predator, oh, I messed up there, didn't I? If you said the cat was the predator of the bird and the bird was the predator of the mouse, you were right. So in this case, the mouse is prey and the bird is prey. And here in southern Indiana, this is a pretty common food chain that I see out where I live. So think about what food chains you might see, and maybe we'll have a different example here in a minute. Also think about if this mouse is prey. I didn't put anything right here, but what do you think he might eat? The next food chain example is going to have 4 animals in it. And remember, our chains always start with plants, but I didn't have any plant rubber stamps, so I'm going to instead start mine with a fly. I'm going to stamp him. We talked about predators and prey. What is the fly the prey of? In this case, a frog. So the frog eats the fly, and then what eats a frog? If you said fish, you were right. Now this one you might actually have to go to a pond or other body of water to see, but it's a pretty common food chain near a body of water. If you're thinking by now, well, there's got to be a predator for the fish, what eats the fish? The answer is a duck. I'll draw my arrows so that when I give you my example on screen, you'll see. I have to lift it up there. The duck eats the fish eats the frog, and the frog eats the fly. And of course the fly eats a plant-based material first, which I didn't put here because I don't have any rubber stamps. I think right now is a good time to talk about ecosystems and how my examples that I showed you of these 2 food chains are ecosystems or animals in ecosystems that are pretty common in southern Indiana. The first one up here being on the land, right? And then the second one, like we talked about, you'd have to go somewhere near water in a pond to see a fish. And I wanted to make food chains that were common in our area, not food chains with elephants and zebras. Even though I have those animal stamps, that's a totally different ecosystem that they live in. So the last one that I'm going to do is going to have 5 animals in it, so a bigger food chain, and then we can talk about how all of these food chains interconnect to make a food web. Okay, for our last example, we're going to have 5 animals found in our southern Indiana ecosystem, and I'm going to start with a butterfly. So an insect, just like we had in our earlier food chain. What eats a butterfly? A spider. I'm going to stamp him and then show you. He doesn't look much like a spider there, but I see his 8 legs, so I know that is supposed to be a spider. What else might we have in our ecosystem that eats spiders? That would be a small little lizard. I call them geckos. Not a big lizard like you might see at the zoo, but they're pretty common smaller lizards that could catch a spider and get nourishment from that. What's going to eat the lizard? An owl. So since we have 5 animals in this one, I'm going to give you a minute to think about what might eat an owl. We'll come back to that. Okay, what have you thought about that eats an owl? My answer is the snake that I showed you earlier. So, stamp the snake on, and that is the end of my food chain. I'll draw the arrows to let you know the relationship of which animal is eating which animal. And you can see that just like the cat ate the bird, ate the mouse, the duck ate the fish, who ate the frog, who ate the fly. Our last one is just a little longer. It's a pretty linear pattern in a straight line of who's going to eat what. Snake is going to eat the owl. The owl is going to be the predator of the lizard. The lizard is going to prey on the spider. And then lastly, that spider is still going to get the butterfly caught in its web, and the butterfly will be the prey of that spider. So now we can begin to think about how all of these chains interconnect to make a food web. What do you think? I'll let you take some time to think on that, and we'll come back and make a web. Okay, you had time to think about how our food chains connect to make a web, and I'm going to show you my examples. Hopefully you have something similar in that the snake, instead of eating the owl, might have caught the duck. The owl might have been the predator to the fish, but the lizard could have been too. So it goes both ways. The frog could eat the spider instead of the fly, and this lizard could choose to eat this fly instead of the spider, right? That's probably the first half of our web. It'll get a little messier when we fill in the top and add that chain on how to make a web, but that's what a web does, right? It's all interconnected. Take a minute to see how your chain might be included in your web and think about how mine is connected to the web that I've already started. Okay, for the last bit of our chains turning into webs, you'll notice that I have the mouse being eaten by the frog, the bird eating the frog, and the cat also eating fish or the duck. Now, if you're thinking, well, there's other ways this could go, you're right. There are lots of other lines we could draw to show how these animals are interconnected, right? It just depends on which animals you picked and what ecosystem you live in. So I want you to think about the one thing that all the chains have in common, besides including animals and including photosynthesis. The answer is not really something that we see unless we've seen an animal that has been eaten and is not alive and is resting somewhere, just its body. It's not hurt, it's more already dead. What's left of that animal and why is it so important? I'll give you a minute to think on that. Okay, so we have talked about what else is part of this food web that we don't have pictured. And the answer is a dead animal or a decomposer. That body of that animal, whether it's been eaten by an animal or just run over by a car, is what I usually relate to decomposers as, because that animal is left, its body is left to decompose and be absorbed back into the earth, or have other animals eating it. And if it's already been dead and another animal comes by and starts to eat it, the name of that animal, or the kind of animal I should say, is a scavenger. So I don't have vultures on my food web, but they could very easily fit into the Indiana ecosystem and many other places because they eat dead animals, and that's an important role in our ecosystem, right? The other thing I didn't mention is that all of these animals involved in our food webs are organisms, living matter, and they provide vital energy to other animals, and they take energy from plants, right? For the most part, our smaller prey animals were the ones that are feeding on the plants that I didn't draw in my web, but are very important, right? Just as is the sun to photosynthesis so that the plants grow for these smaller animals. The last thing I want you to keep in mind is that every organism has a purpose in this food chain, right? That nourishes other animals. My question for you is, where do humans fit in on that food chain or food web? I hope you thought about how humans fit into the food web and how, while we might not eat a snake or an owl that we made on our food chain earlier, they're still very important predators to the animal world. We just happen to get our animals and the meat and nourishment from them, usually from a grocery store. So, your human animals are still part of the food chain and very important at the top of the food chain, you would say, and important to the whole web. There are lots of other examples of how humans could be important in food webs and in ecosystems and the care of those ecosystems. So we'll save that for another day, and I am glad you could join me. Thanks.